Hi, I'm Tom for Waterwise Botanicals, and this is going to be kind of a crazy talk today. I don't know if folks have thought about what would happen, how would I get by if something really serious went down. I mean, some people are worried about war, they're worried about civil war, they're worried about different things that what might really happen that would change the entire equation, and all of a sudden, what do I do the next day? Actually, the most likely probability for that kind of a disaster for those of us in California would be for the San Andreas fault to snap and just make a giant earthquake. And if it did that, everything would be out of whack. Water would be shut down because it's run by electricity and power pumping plants, but also just the aqueducts and everything could possibly be fractured. Power would go down because the grid would be completely disrupted and fractured. Of course, there in some areas, buildings may collapse. But without power, without water, and with much of the transportation mess, like roads and highways messed up, you could literally be in a situation where you have to fend for yourself. Kind of like if you watch some of the episodes of Naked and Afraid. Except we're going to learn how to be clothed and confident. Because there are actual ways that you could carry on and create for yourself a kind of survival where you could fend for yourself, feed yourself and others in your family, and get by during a time when, say, nothing is available. Now remember, if the power goes off, there's no refrigeration. Your refrigerator is done, and everything in it within a day or two is done. No refrigeration at grocery stores. Grocery stores, there would be a giant panic. People would raid it. Everything, I don't think you even want to be down there in that mess. But that's not going to be an available source very likely as well. So we kind of thought it'd be interesting to see what a person would do for survival right here in our environment. Now, you might think that I'm going to say, well, you need to have your own vegetable garden and you should be growing your own food. Yes, to a degree, that's a solution if you got started well in advance. You have to have an established vegetable garden. It's got to be producing food. And don't forget, if the water goes off, then very quickly, your vegetable garden is pretty much done. Okay? So that's why we're not really going to be discussing a lot of the grow your own food vegetable gardening scenario today, because first of all, it's over-talked. I mean, you can go to a million sources and learn how to do that and grow your own food and have vegetable garden and like the vegetables to grow at what time of year and that kind of thing. But that's really not where we are today, because we're talking about absolute take care of yourself survival, okay? I want to start out, probably none of you are as old as I am, but I remember a guy on TV that used to be the spokesperson for Grape Nuts Cereal, and his name was Ewell Gibbons. And he used to be, he would say, I'm a naturalist. He said, did you ever eat a pine tree? Many parts are edible. And that would be his takeoff. And then he'd go on to talk about Grape Nuts Cereal. Well, Ewell Gibbons passed away, and they asked me to write his eulogy. And his eulogy went something like this. Alas, my poor naturalist friend, he died. Though it seems incredible, there are many parts are edible of that redwood tree he tried, though all he could see of that towering tree was lunch, first sight. The deadly truth for our forest sleuth was its bark was worse than his butt. All right, let's talk about essentials. Before you get started out with anything else, again, I want you to go to that scenario where maybe you was watching an episode of Naked and Afraid. The two most essential things that you could have are matches or lighters, but sometimes lighters can fail, and a container, a pot, a pan, and also maybe some buckets for storage, like Home Depot buckets, and storage of maybe what you might gather or what you might glean or what you can carry. They're great carrying devices too. Okay, so basically fire, because fire will sterilize your food, make it edible. Okay, things need to be cooked or you can make yourself very sick. You can even take water out of a pond, and if you boil it, then it may not taste great, but it will be safe. So the most important thing, first of all, is fire, the ability to heat things and make it hot and warm. Now, most people in our day and age might have a pack of matches somewhere in the house, might not. Might have a lighter, might not. But I think it's a really good idea, because remember, you don't want to go to the stores where people are killing each other trying to get food. But it might be a good idea to just have several of those boxes of easy strike matches somewhere stored away. And if you do store them away, don't unwrap them out of that cellophane wrapping, because moisture eventually starts getting to it, and they're very hard to light after a while, okay? But matches is one thing, and then the other thing are pots, pans, and then buckets that you can carry stuff with, buckets with lids. If I was going to go out and naked and afraid, and they said, here's the one tool you can have, or the one this or that you can have, I'd want a lighter that I could start a small little cooking fire with. You do it in your backyard barbecue. That can become your cooking place, your cooking stove. You can just put wood in it after the propane runs out. No problem. Be safe with it. Okay, the other thing is, when it comes to water, if you weren't ahead of yourself and stored water, like a lot of people do, they'll have several 5-gallon jugs of water, you would maybe need to find and locate water, because the water goes out. If the system goes down, say because of an earthquake, a lot of times there's water left in the system that may last a day or two. This is your chance to try to store water. Buckets, even your bathtub, plug the bathtub and fill it with water. Now, somebody in the audience is already starting to harass me. We have a bullfrog in the pond next door. And obviously, he doesn't agree with what I'm saying. And that's because he's on the menu when we get further down. Okay, so water is super important. You want to get what you can. Believe it or not, take off the top of the lid of the back of your toilet. That water that's in the reservoir does not mix with water that is unsanitary down below. That's fresh water. So that water is drinkable, okay? Now, any water that is exposed, even like in that back of the toilet reservoir there, any water that's exposed for more than a few days can actually start to go bad. It can have bacteria develop it and that kind of thing. So again, you want to use that fire to boil it first, heat it, but then it's potable water that you can use and you can survive on and you can live on. We also have a airplane pilot instructor who likes to fly and circle over our area all day long. So you get to enjoy him as well, buzzing and something. Okay, so those are kind of the absolute keys. Now the other thing is people don't realize that even this area, which is quite dry, we're Southern California, it's a desert, but especially in North County and towards Fallbrook, but many other areas, we have a river. You can't see the river because it's buried in trees and just a very thick forest of trees that they let it get out of control. But there's a river that flows in there. We also have like Wahomie Lake. And actually, if you go all around and through Fallbrook, everywhere, there's little creeks, streams, there's ponds, there's all different sources of waters that you can find and locate. For example, the new winery just right over on the road there has a very nice pond and a stream that runs through that canyon there. So there is water available. You might have to move around or know where it is, or go to Google Earth and look around, but water is available in sources in our area, especially North County, okay? So you can get water, again, you heat it and boil it, and it's potent. Okay, now let's talk about edible plants. Well, you could start out with urban plants. We have plants growing in our gardens, and so I thought I'd review some of those that are edible that you could go out and eat. And this weed is called purslane. It's actually fairly well known in cooking in Mexico and different dishes that they make. It's a succulent weed, so depending on time of year or if there's water, this grows very, very fast in the summertime. I see a very small plant about this big, get that wide just in a heartbeat. In like a week or two, it grows so fast. Nice flavor. Actually very nutritious. Has a lot of good nutrition in that, and it's good to go. Another one, this is an ornamental succulent that is planted quite frequently in people's yards. This is called elephant's food bush. Okay, Portulacaria family. We grow 4 or 5 different varieties here. Portulacaria, or the elephant's food bush, grows in Africa. Now, if you were in Africa, the elephants would probably beat you to it, because this would grow in big groves, like in the side of a hill. And the elephants, during different times of the year, would come and visit a patch, and they would just eat and trample and destroy it, and they would eat until they couldn't eat a bite more. And then they just gather up a whole bunch more, load it in their trunks, and drive away. Oh, that's an elephant deal. I don't think we have elephants here, so the competition shouldn't be too rough. This is a tart flavor, almost like eating those sour candies that kids like. But again, high nutrition, a lot of vitamin C, a lot of nutrition in it, and it's almost a superfood. Another one is just the common daylily. Used to be in yards all over the place. It's not as much available these days, but there's still a lot of it around in landscapes, yards, and gardens. The flower is edible, and in fact, quite delicious. The only problem with this is daylilies come in different colors. There's orange, yellow, and red, and I just wish we could have this taste like an orange, and red taste like cherry, and yellow taste like lemon, but they all taste the same. But the flower petals of this are good to eat. Also, if you dig up a daylily, then the roots are edible as well. They're little tubers, and you can slice them up like little small jiccamas. You can slice them up, you can eat them raw, or you can cook them in a little bit of oil. Okay, on your list that I gave you, a nice handout, we'll start out also with prickly pear cactus. This is a standard that could save you for a very long period, because there is native, natural prickly pear growing all over the county in the hills. There's also been planted in people's gardens, because it's part of the Hispanic culture, the nopales, or tuna cactus, which is the big thornless variety. We grow a variety that's very compact and thornless. That's one plant you could have in your yard that wouldn't matter whether you water it or not. And the pads of that can be singed so that the cactus spines don't get in your mouth. That's where that fire comes in important again. And you turn it and singe off all of the spines. And if it's young pads, then you just slice that up like bell peppers, and it's a superfood. It's highly nutritious. It's got protein, it's got carbs, it's got vitamin C. It's an excellent, excellent food. The older pads, which comes into the time of year when it's dry and they're done growing for spring, are not so delicious, but they're food. And the same thing, you can still go ahead and singe off the thorns and the stickers, and you can skin off the outer skin, which is tough, and then you can eat the interior, which is green and rich in nutrition. Okay, then we have cattails. Cattails are often called the survivalist grocery store. Cattails, you know what they are, right? They grow on the edges of ponds and streams, and they have those cool little flower things, that look like a hot dog on a hot dog stick. Guahomie Lake Park, right down west of us, has probably 80 to 100 acres of cattails. And every part of the cattail is edible. The Indians used to take and dig them up and eat the roots. They cut up the tubers and pound and eat the roots. And it's a starchy material, so it produces carbohydrates. They would eat the young flower stems, the cattail itself, before it became mature. And you'd almost you could roast it almost like you'd roast an ear of corn. Inside the heart of the leaves that's rising up, you can also harvest that. And it's like heart of palm, some people would say. And you eat that, it's almost like the heart of an artichoke. And so that's all good food. All different parts of the cattail are good food. Even the pollen. The Indians used to collect pollen when they're in that stage of bloom, where they're producing pollen, and make almost kind of a doughy flour out of it. Now, we're going over a lot of different varieties here, and it's really hard to keep track of this. But every single one of these things, you can just go to the internet and study it for yourself. There's a ton of information on it. So you have a list of different plants and things that are edible right here, and that way we don't have to turn this into a 7-week class. Then we're going to go down the list. But cattails are fantastic. One thing about cattails, though, is you're pulling that out of water. Frequently, something that you pull out of water has water snails in it and other debris. A lot of the time it's a swampy area and material. So be sure that you cook and sterilize that. Wash it very well or cook and sterilize it, and never, ever, ever eat a water snail. Water snails are full of parasites. Okay? Okay, next, acorns. Well, before acorns, the palm trees everywhere, fan palm trees that you see all around, the super common ones. Those have big arching clusters of seeds. And the outside of those seeds is the same fruity textured material as on a date palm. Now, it's not a big, thick date like on a date palm, but still, that skin has got carbohydrates in it, sugars in it. There's sometimes where they're gathered and boiled down and make a sugar, derive a sugar out of that. So that's a food source as well. Another thing is acorns. We have oak trees all over the place. Acorns. It's such an important food source that, in fact, Valley Center, right up above us, used to be called Bear Valley. And it was called Bear Valley because the largest grizzly bear in the continental United States was taken there. Can you imagine grizzly bears in North San Diego County? What did they eat? Well, one of their main food sources was acorns because we have huge oak forests. Okay, so acorns do require some processing. You'll need to look that up and study it. But that's a very abundant food source at the time of the year when those acorns start dropping and are available to you. But another one is we have wild grapes. If you go and look in some of the creek sites all up and down the roads to go into Fallbrook, you'll see growing along the streams and tangling up into the trees look like grapevines. Well, they are grapevines. And they grow little small grapes. They're not, choice grapes like you get at the grocery store, but they grow little small grapes, which are edible, and they actually ripen and sweeten and become very small little raisins with seeds inside, but there's a lot of food source nutrition that you could derive out of that. Okay, we're going to skip down a little minute and go to nettle, stinging nettle. Can you imagine? Let's just take a big old branch of stinging nettle and jam it into our mouth. That sounds tasty, doesn't it? Interestingly enough, if you pick it, and you have to pick it a little carefully, and boil it, it turns pretty much into spinach. Highly nutritious. Very, very good food. Another one is the mustard plants. In the springtime when we have all those yellow flowers, but if it's good rainy season, it gets this high. Almost all of that is edible. The leaves, the young stems, and the flowers, those are edible too and nutritious. Also, there's another weed called cheeseweed or lamb's quarter. And again, you can look these up and identify them, see what they look like, how you would harvest them and what to look for. Now, I remember as kids, lamb's quarter, I grew up in northern Nevada, and lamb's quarter used to have little seed pods inside, and that's how it gets the name cheeseweed or cheese wheel, is because the seed pod looks like a little wheel of cheese, the way the seeds are stacked. And we used to we were just goofing off, and we used to take that and just pick out those little seed pods while they were green and just eat those. They tasted like green peas. They were actually really good. So that's another one that you can create food out of. Fennel, also the licorice plant, that can be used. You can be boiled down as a tea and added to your gleaned and gathered salads. And so that's a native available plant as well. Now let's go to something else. If it was really horrible, say everything just collapsed, civilization is collapsing, agriculture is going to collapse, they can no longer water anything, okay? I never, ever advocate going into removing fruit or avocados or grapes from private property and from farmers, because those people are growing food to feed us. But if it really got to the point where everything was just abandoned and civilization virtually no longer went on, these plants are going to keep going on for a very long time, especially grapes, because they can grow and produce fruit pretty much almost on the native rainfall. And not only do they have the ripe grapes during the season, but almost all of those turn into raisins after a while, which is very long lasting. That holds the sugars inside. Okay. Also, citrus is quite drought tolerant. So after the second or third year still in the growth, you probably will find some refugee oranges and lemons here and there, some of the hardier citrus on trees that are still eking out of survival. Avocado trees, please, again, don't ever go take a farmer's avocados, because you're taking your own avocados. That's what feeds us in the grocery stores. But if everything is collapsed, or if you do like I did, I found an avocado tree growing on the edge of the river, on the edge of the highway, on the way into Oceanside. It's on nobody's property. It's on public easement, and you could go there if you knew where it was, and we could pick avocados off of it right there. Okay, so these are some options that you would have on being able to gather food that is plant-based. Now, another one is if you really wanted to, and the reason again that I told you that I'm not really featuring vegetable gardens is because they're so delicate and in need of that regular frequent watering. But let's talk about some plants that are asparagus. Asparagus grows with a big root underneath the ground, and it's very resilient. It's very resilient to drought, and it just keeps coming up and coming up. And if there's a dry season, then it'll turn brown on top, and as soon as the rains come and the spring comes, it'll just start shooting these beautiful asparagus shoots up again. It's great food that way. Comes again and again. Another one is tomatoes by seed. So if you do have a spring rainy season, low soil for a while, you could plant tomato seeds. And the reason that I selected tomato is because, as you know, vegetable gardening is also a battle against nature. Everything wants to eat your stuff, right? Well, tomatoes are in the nightshade family, which most of that family are poisons. And most critters don't like them. Gophers don't really like to eat tomatoes. Rabbits don't like to eat tomatoes. Squirrels don't like to eat tomatoes. So if you're able to sprinkle some tomato seeds, and especially the cherry varieties, because they're the most hardy and the most durable, then you might get some springtime tomato plants. Or you might find a spot down by where there's a stream and a little bit of a clearing where you can haul water, and you could grow some in a little secret spot that you have and raise a few of your tomato plants. If you try to do that with almost any other vegetable, it's just going to be eaten right away. But tomato plants are not liked by most creatures. Okay. And another plant that is the same deal are green onions. Now, regular onions and garlics, you know, you have to start with a bulb or something like that. But you can start with seeds with green onions, and virtually nothing eats them. And so I got green onion plants in my vegetable garden. Even after this year, the squirrels ravaged them. I got green onions that they won't touch. They're actually very nice and very harvestable all the time. Shallots are in the same group, so you can even get a little bit of that, you know, oniony type base at the bottom. That works out really good. The Jerusalem artichokes. Jerusalem artichokes are actually in the sunflower family. And they grow tall, about 5-6 feet tall, with flowers that look like sunflowers, but very branchy and small yellow flowers. Underneath the ground, they're producing these masses of roots that taste kind of like jicama. It's really good. You slice it and cut it up, and it's a very delicious edible root. Now, the thing about that, though, is rodents and gophers love them to death. So you have to have some way where you kind of protect them. But if you can't protect them, that's a fantastic, durable food. In fact, many of the people in countries that were on the way to Russia during World War II and were being overtaken by Germany, they would cut down all of their crops so that there would be no food for the enemy soldiers to confiscate and swipe, or they would confiscate and swipe it anyway. There'd be nothing left for people. But they had Jerusalem artichoke planted all over the place, and they cut the stems right to the ground so it couldn't even be seen that they were there or they were growing there. And so after the troops ravaged and pillaged the village and moved on through, and there's nothing left, there actually was something left, and they literally survived a lot of times off of Jerusalem artichoke. They can be ordered, mail order, and you can plant those, and they grow through spring and summer and into fall, and they're very vigorous. They produce a lot of food, and then they die down in the wintertime, but that thump of roots is right there. Great to eat. Okay, so we've gone over plants quite a bit. Now let's talk about protein. I don't want to turn anybody's stomach, but again, you've watched Naked and Afraid, and they're willing by about week 2 or week 3 to eat anything, okay? And if people get really hungry, you can get to the point where you're really willing to about eat anything if you want to feed your kids. A couple of the easiest things is you watch them build like snares and all these different things and little traps like where a rock falls down. I grew up in the mountains, and those things hardly ever work. I'm not kidding. I studied the Paiute Indians with my grandmother, and that's kind of not the way they really did it because it's not very successful. All those little snares and traps and stuff, you'll check them every day, and it's extremely rare that they'll even trip one, and it's even more rare
that they don't escape before the rock or the snare catches them or clunks on them. So let's talk about something that really, really works. This is something you can buy at a farm store like Tractor Supply or Grand Jettos. This is called the Squirrelnator. We have an abundance of squirrels in North County, in San Diego County. And all you need to do is find something green. It could be the acorns at one time a year. It could be some green stems of some certain kind of weed, some of the things that we even discussed. And you put it inside of the little trap, and the squirrel jumps in, and you have dinner. Not going to teach you how to process it. That's all things you can research and look up. But you could have meat on a very frequent basis. Another one that's overlooked. If you go out into our chaparral areas, just in the mountains and the hills, the ground is riddled with gopher holes. But what makes gopher holes? Gophers. Means there's a lot of gophers out there. And if you again go to one of those supply places, farm supply places, you can get a Maccabee gopher trap. Now I know that we're not thinking of gopher next time we go to Sizzler, one of our favorite steakhouses, but this is food. You literally could catch food. And if you watch those guys on that TV show by week 3, they're ready to eat anything. This could actually be a huge gift. And you could be catching gophers very easily and by a ton. And then there's another one. This is a minnow trap. You can order it over the internet, have it on hand. I told you there's water all over the place around here. And all you have to do is put some bait. It could be insects that you don't like to eat. It could be worms. It could be grubs. You load it up with some bait, drop it in for a couple or a few hours or overnight in a pond, a little spot in a stream where you can place it. And in the morning, you'll have small fish and often crawdads, which are all edible. Okay? And there's ponds and lakes all over, same thing. You can't imagine how much fish and aquatic life is in those ponds. So that's another option. If you had these 3 traps, you would actually be on a fairly consistent basis, be capturing protein and food that you could eat. Another thing that I would strongly recommend on your first set of supplies that you want is you should have fishing line and fish hooks. That actually goes at the very top with matches, buckets, pots, pans, and containers, is fishing line and fish hooks. Because again, fish are accessible. Whether you get down to the ocean, whether you find a pond or a stream, even little fish all of a sudden are a meal. There's something we can eat and you can survive on. Okay. Now, another thing that you can do, say you have a place where you can be, or your home or your property. If you stack organics, what that means is gather a lot of brush, trees, branches, bust it up as much as you can, and make yourself this pile of basically coarse, thick mulch. It's not like you're going to run it through a chipper, but the same biological activity starts taking place. And you mash it and get it into a pile. The deeper the better, the thicker the better. First of all, you'll find we've had places where we dumped piles of mulch that were, like this thick and wide, and never watered again from spring. It was still moist underneath in August after 3 or 4 months of no rain. So it traps moisture in the soil. Also, it loads up with earthworms. It loads up with grubs, with all kinds of creatures and critters and organisms that you could use for bait. Generally, you don't want to eat most of those organisms, but you could use it for bait, like for your fishing and for your minnow traps. Okay, now let's talk about things that you could actually get for food, as well as, like we talked about, the things that you can trap here. Termites are delicious. I've eaten a lot of termites. They taste like pine nuts, okay? Termites aren't very big, but if you find, like in this scenario also, things aren't getting watered, there's going to be a lot of tree deaths. And so you can find termites, especially in pine trees, underneath the bark. The ones that you eat are little white worker termites, and they're soft. There's no crunch to it or anything, and they just taste like the pine trees that they're feeding on. They're quite good. Okay, grubs. Now, I've tried a lot of different grubs. Some I like and some I don't. If they're grubs that are in wood, like feeding on wood and under the bark, like in a dying eucalyptus tree, not bad at all. Pretty tasty. Again, it tastes kind of woody and it has some nut-like flavor to it. There's other grubs that live in the ground and in the soil or in your mulch pile, and they're not so tasty. But still, if you were going to die, there's a lot of nutritious fats in those, and it's a food source. Lizards, you've watched them roast up lizards on the TV show. You can always look for a bird's nest. You know, if you're observant and you watch a spot where little birds are flying in and out constantly all day long, there's a nest there with a tiny little amba inside. Don't tell my wife, because she just raised 2 little families of sparrows, one on her front door, the wreath, and she enjoyed watching the whole process. But that's something else as well. How about garden snails? We have yards and landscapes everywhere just full of snails, right? That's the European brown snail. It doesn't even belong. They were brought over from France by a guy who decided that he was going to raise escargot and become a millionaire in the early 1900s. So that's how we got one of our nastiest garden pests. And how that happened, I don't know, because picture us. He goes, yes, I am going to raise these wonderful snails. Get along, these little doggies. And he put them in a snail corral, and he's raising them and getting ready to sell them to the restaurants. And then one night, there's a terrible escape where the snail stampeded and tore down the doors and just ran and got away everywhere. And he couldn't catch them because they're so fast. How did that happen? And we have the European brown snail. Cook them. Always cook a mollusk and never eat them raw. Bullfrogs. In a lot of our waterways, you've heard of frog legs are served in restaurants back in the South. Okay? So bullfrogs are edible. Some parts are edible. That's food. Okay? And then we talked about fish, but never eat a water snail. And if you're harvesting anything out of or near the water, the little water snails look very different from our garden snails. Don't eat them. They can carry some horrible, terrible parasites. One other one that you might be tempted to try, like my little brother and I, there's an abundance of grasshoppers up in northern Nevada where we grew up, and we thought grasshoppers would be pretty tasty. They taste like crap. And but the thing about grasshoppers, again, is they can carry parasites. So you always cook your grasshoppers before you eat them. Okay, Chris in the back said, what about snakes? Goodness sakes, nobody wants to eat snakes. Okay, well, you can, and everybody sees it on the TV show, right? But I'm just going to tell you, I've eaten quite a few snakes. There's almost nothing there. It's the edible part of the snake, the actual meat that's on the outside of that rib cage that runs all the way down the body of the snake, it's like a little thin laminate of tissue, of meat tissue that you can eat. There's very little to eat, to be honest. So am I going to be here and sit here and not only that, but the snakes that are not rattlesnakes have even less. Rattlesnakes are kind of the meatiest ones of all. And if you think that I'm going to be here encouraging you to catch and eat rattlesnakes and get a lawsuit, don't do it. It's not safe. Okay, the return is not all that great. Okay, other than that, make your own decisions. But I think that we kind of went through a primer that would tell you how you could make it through several days, several weeks, and be clothed and confident. And I'm Tom for WaterWiseBotanicals.com.